Okay, hi everyone. We're going to be starting the webinar now. So from everyone here at Web Anywhere, I'd like to say welcome to part 2 of our gamification webinar. Part 1 was about a month ago. So this time we're going to be looking into some techniques and ideas that you might use to help out with your gamification. Joining me today is Stuart Dyson. Stuart is an instructional designer for the Workplace Learning Division of Web Anywhere. He's been working in the learning sector for 10 years and has experience in a number of different roles, including multimedia developer, lecturer of digital graphics, and interactive media and instructional design. He's worked with universities and colleges, as well as clients such as Medtronic Inc. and Danone Dairies. So after that, it's over to you, Stuart.
Hi everybody, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and thanks for taking time to join us today for the second part of our webinar on gamification. Let's have a quick look through the agenda to see what we'll be covering today. So we'll have a quick recap on what is gamification. This will be for people who maybe didn't have time to attend the previous webinar. We'll be looking at the benefits of gamification, why should we be adopting it or trying to use it within our e-learning programs, what makes gamification work in terms of what are the mechanics that are put together, some simple but important design principles on how to make gamification a success, and also the do's and don'ts of gamification, some things which are important to know when rolling out your e-learning strategy. So first of all, I'd like to start with a quick poll because possibly you're all in different places in terms of your knowledge of gamification or your current journey. So I'm going to open up this poll just and if you could read the question, so where are you on your gamification journey? So I'm quite new and here to learn more about it. I'm somewhat familiar, considering to apply in my training. I've used game-like elements in my training and plan to use more. Or the closest I've come to gamification is collecting stars for my Starbucks rewards. So the poll is open and we'll just give you a minute to answer that. Okay, thanks for answering that question. So I can see there's a fairly even split between people that are somewhat familiar and considering applying it to training and people who have used game-like elements in their training previously. And there's a small percentage of you who are quite new to it and like to learn more about it. So that's quite interesting. Let's have a look at the next stage. So just a quick recap of the previous webinar. What is gamification? A very short description would be that it's a learning theory or style that applies game logic and mechanics in a non-game context used within e-learning. So why should we use gamification? What are the benefits of it? Is it just a buzz term or is it actually useful for your business and for learning? Well, first of all, gamification can boost motivation by offering things like challenging and achievable tasks. These can be combined with rewards, which this has been proven to increase engagement and also motivation. Gamification, when it's done well, provides feedback at every step of the way in various different forms, visual feedback through badges, progress bars, etc. It's shown that learners like to know where they are. The more feedback you can give them, the more likely they are to continue. Of course, it offers increased engagement in terms of mobile learning and the ability for them to be able to learn at their own pace. A good way to increase engagement is by trying to wrap the training materials around a compelling narrative, and this might help you to achieve better results. And also, it can improve retention. If you offer the learners pathways which aren't always linear and hide in some surprises, it will allow learners to go through a module and perhaps they haven't obtained all of the achievements or the rewards, or there's the ability to obtain a higher score. The replay factor means that if they enjoyed it the first time, they may be challenged to go through it again to get all of these rewards. And of course, the more you do something, the more you remember it. Repetition equals significance. In terms of learning theory, the 70-20-10 model is something I'm quickly just going to talk about because it does fit into gamification. Now, I'm not sure if some of you or all of you are familiar with the 70-20-10 learning model. Learning model that was developed in the 1980s, and it was developed as a general guideline for companies and organizations that were seeking to maximize the effectiveness of their learning and development programs. It was broken down into 3 chunks, 70-20-10, with 70% of learning being hands-on experience. This enabled people to discover and refine, for example, their job-related skills, their decision-making, and address challenges and interact with other staff members within work settings. The 70% hands-on work also allowed them to analyse mistakes and receive immediate feedback on their performance. The 20% chunk was through learning and developing through others. So employees learn through others during a variety of activities. So this is, for example, social learning, coaching and mentoring, collaborative learning, and other methods of interaction with their peers. In this instance, encouragement and feedback are prime benefits of social learning. The final 10% chunk is the kind of standardized professional and personal development through traditional training courses. So this could include classroom environments, one-to-one face-to-face training, and e-learning. So a mixture there of blended learning in today's modern age. Even though the model 7-20-10 was developed before the internet age, and it didn't really reflect, of course, online and mobile learning, it's still considered to be generally consistent with developmental experiences of many people still within the learning and professional sectors. Now, how can this model tie in with gamification? Well, it can tie in with gamification because 70% of the hands-on experience in this model is about hands-on experience. Now, with gamification, you can create now scenarios, narratives and stories which can allow for people to reenact or act out things which they do during their work hours. So they can experiment with actions they would do in their daily routines. Different actions with various combinations often result in unique outcomes. And being able to allow the user to practice this in a digital world has a lot of benefits. I guess the comparison to this previously would be the dreaded role play in the kind of group training. So that's part of the 10% of this model. Receiving feedback, you have greater control over the feedback when using e-learning. So different pathways would lead to different results, therefore different feedback. And feedback can be given in a number of different ways: visual feedback, verbal feedback through audio or video. And finally, it allows you to practice routines safely. During the e-learning, you can do a scenario which takes you off in different branches, and you can make that mistake which you couldn't make in the real world on the job, and then you can get feedback from that. So it does allow people to make mistakes which ultimately aren't detrimental to the organisation. So that has to be a big plus. Now, as I said in the beginning with the definition of gamification, it uses game mechanics in a non-gaming context. So what are game mechanics? The use of game mechanics in e-learning can help to increase motivation and engagement across courses. The icons on the right-hand side, they might give you a little clue what game mechanics are. And we're going to go through some of those. So game mechanics can be things like points and leaderboards. So how are they useful in e-learning? Points, for example, will allow you to measure a user's achievements in relation to others. These kind of details can be sent back to the LMS learning management systems so they can be tracked. Leaderboards, of course, they increase activity by organising players or learners by rank, so they can see how they stand up against their peers. Badges and rewards essentially are incentives. Give the users a visual reward to show their progress, to track their progress. Incentivise learning either digitally through the e-learning software, or even better, which I'm sure most learners would prefer, is some kind of real-world incentive. And another type of game mechanics is levels and challenges. Levels encourage users to progress further and to unlock new levels and rewards. And challenges, adding extra challenges to the course can keep it fresh and makes it easily updatable, so you can add on to an existing training course. Now, if we have a look at this screenshot, I'm sure you've all played this game. It is, of course, the classic Pac-Man. This game is 30 plus years old. And in this screenshot, I'm wondering how many of these game mechanics that I've just described you can see in this screenshot. Well, there's one there. This is the high score. So effectively, the high score is shown to every player. So essentially, it's the leaderboard. You've got your current score, which is your points total. So that allows you to measure achievements at the current state of time. We have these little rewards here, the fruits. So it tells you what you've picked up along your journey. And then you have the number of lives left or the number of attempts remaining for the e-learning. So even 30 years ago, these mechanics were still in place because it gives the player, an experience and something to add on so that they can try it again and they can compare their statistics, their scores, their results to others. So we're just going to run another quick poll now. And the poll is, which statement best describes your current training? Click next presentation style with as many words that you can fit on a slide, what we refer to as a non-interactive PowerPoint, or a linear presentation with audio, you know, someone reading each slide to me. Scenario-based, engaging and meaningful, so this is closer to gamification, or I don't even know how to explain it. Maybe it's really good, maybe it's really bad. So you just take a moment to answer that. Okay, let's have a look. So looking at the results, there's one group which is higher than the rest, which is number one, the click next presentation style with as many words that you can fit on a slide. Possibly, in my view, the least effective e-learning. It's neither engaging or fun, and this is kind of the cumbersome type of e-learning, which I guess most people are accustomed to. But then we've got an even split, exactly 20% for the linear presentations with audio. Does audio lift the presentation much higher above the click next presentation? If the audio is just, for example, repeating what's on screen, is there any value to it? It's nice to see that 20% of people actually have used some kind of scenario-based, engaging and meaningful content. It means the industry is moving in the right direction. And for the 20% of people who don't even know how to explain it, I'm curious as to whether or not you can't explain it because it was overwhelmingly great or if it was very poor. So what we'll do is we'll move on, and what we're going to talk about now is some design principles, some ways to approach gamification in a way that means it will hopefully be a success for your training needs. First of all, as mentioned previously, gamification, it's about a narrative, it's about a story. Are you telling your learners a story, or are you just drowning them in facts? Story-based learning, it connects the audience emotionally to the content. This in turn can motivate them to become more involved in the training. Where possible, it's a good idea to try and avoid text-heavy material that is lengthy and overly factual, because learners, they'll quickly get bored, it's not engaging for them. As an alternative, try and weave the facts in seamlessly throughout the story. Secondly, be real. One of the advantages is that you can use scenarios. You can use real-world scenarios that they might encounter on a daily basis. Is it theoretical without any meaningful context? Arguably it's not. Trigger thinking by guiding the audience through reality-based learning scenarios. Ask the learners to solve a problem that they may encounter. This has an impact on the final results. Number 3, engage your audience. Are the interactions mentally stimulating? Do they serve a purpose? Do they match what's happening on screen? Try and avoid using interactions just for the sake of it. Effective interactivity, it makes the learners think, unlike a series of arbitrary clicks on the screen, which 40% of you are more than familiar with. Make sure that the training is interactive by presenting the learners with opportunities to explore the page, to explore their activity, as opposed to giving them one path to move through. Number 4, be clear. Make sure that you're speaking your learner's language. Is it just full of jargon? Is it full of words which they're not going to need in their daily routines? Words that they can't identify with? You always need to make sure that the content, when it's broken down, is delivered at the right level. Also, think about giving it the right look. Is the design visually appealing? Of course, companies generally have strong branding and strong ties. Generally with gamification, if it's for a corporation and it's in-house, there's generally a lot more flexibility with the look, with the design. Graphics can be a great way to illustrate a point, provided that it's relevant to the material. Put thought into the aesthetics of the course and choose a colour palette that's visually appealing. Also, when you're thinking about graphics and screen architecture, think about, does this translate on my desktop, on my laptop, on my tablet, on my mobile? That's something also which is very important to think about. Finally, in terms of design principles, always remember to stay on track. Make sure that the activities are interesting and they're relevant. Any interactions that into the course, they should be based on the original objectives and not the other way around. Try not to squeeze an interaction to fit your objective, or think an interaction is great but it doesn't quite fit the objective, so we'll just kind of bend the objective a little bit. This doesn't work because ultimately then it doesn't achieve your learning outcomes. Always identify what the learners will get out of the course. If the content is not delivered in a way that has personal relevance to not only to the user but also to the course content, it's not likely to stick with them, and ultimately it will be just as ineffective as a click-through PowerPoint. Okay, just as we come towards the end, we're going to go through a do's and don'ts list. So these are the things which are generally good practice and things which are seen as not good practice. So first of all, where possible, try and give your learners a choice. By this I mean, if it's possible within a learning object, to give them more than one way to explore it, more than one path from beginning to end, do that. When you give users a choice, it creates meaning to them at the same time. The individuals feel a sense of responsibility and empowerment when they're encouraged to choose their own path in pursuit of a goal, as opposed to being pushed in one direction. Make sure that you get the skill level right. Providing a balance between challenge and achievement can be quite difficult. Unattainable goals are disengaging and often frustrating, while on the other hand, challenges that are too easy can be just as unengaging and off-putting. So make sure that if you set them a task, make sure that it is possible to do it, but it does require some thinking, it does require some logic. If it's too easy, they'll get bored. If it's too difficult, they will give up. Show the progress. It's always a good idea to show people's progress as soon as you can, to let them know that they're moving in the right direction. People like to know how often or how far they are through a section. Think, for example, of people who read books. For example, when I read a book, when I start a chapter, after reading the first page, I always see when the next chapter is, because I like to see how many pages are in the chapter, because I want to see, can I finish this in the time I've set aside to read this chapter. This kind of progress is exactly the same. People are far less likely to abandon their goal when they've already put some level of effort into achieving it, and also if they know or they can gauge how much time it will take before they get to the end. Also, gaming is social. If you think about the popularity of online gaming, for example, things like Xbox Live, it's all about showing off your achievements to your friends, letting them know how many points they've got, how many awards they've given, how good they are at something. Humans, after all, we are social creatures. By integrating social elements into e-learning, you will increase interactivity and collaboration among your learners. So there are the do's. Here are some of the don'ts. Sometimes less is more. Gamification is about using game mechanics, but it doesn't mean that you have to use them all. It's not about adding as many mechanics as possible. It can often then feel cluttered, and you find that mechanics are in there and they're underused. This just creates clutter and it kind of loses focus. Try to identify and then focus on incorporating appropriate mechanics and design techniques which will make the learning objectives engaging and achievable. Meaningful is memorable. As I said previously, don't use interactions without meaning. An interaction should complement the on-screen activity. The audio shouldn't mirror the on-screen activity, it should accompany it. It should always be complementary. Any kind of video or audio should complement what's happening on the screen. It shouldn't mirror it, and it's not intended to replace it. Learning outcomes are important. When you write any kind of criteria, ultimately at the end of the learning, there are boxes that need to be ticked, information that needs to be understood. Remember that the learning objects and the outcomes of the original brief, it can be easy to get carried away with gamified ideas and concepts, something which you may think is cool just for the sake of it. While these ideas might be cool and they might be engaging, before you add them in, ask yourself this question: do they offer value? Do they offer value in terms of the learning objectives and the outcome? And finally, don't bite off more than you can chew. When I say this, I'm considering the length of these learning objects. Keep things manageable for the learner. There's nothing worse than opening up an e-learning document and it says page 1 of 74. I mean, that is very off-putting. Learning should be compact and focused. Bite-sized learning is easier to digest and understand and evaluate. And of course, with mobile learning now, it's much more suitable for learning on the go, having smaller bite-sized modules that can be done and supported on devices. Okay, we've reached the end of this micro session on gamification. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat window, and we'll do our best to answer some of them. So I'll just give you a moment there to see if any come in. Okay, so I've got a question coming. It said, did I say that we should include learning outcomes in e-learning? Yeah, the learning outcomes are what you want to achieve, what you want the learners to achieve when they've completed the learning, whether or not it be just multimedia or gamification. Your end goal, once they've completed the training, is to have successfully completed the learning outcomes. You always need to bear in mind the learning outcomes is why they're doing the training. So this needs to be reflected and achieved throughout the learning module. Just one more point on that actually, about the learning outcomes. You should make them visible, you should make them known to the learner at the beginning. They need to know what they should be learning and what they should take away at the end. So it's important to make them aware of what the learning outcomes are. Normally this is done in an introduction slide or somewhere near the beginning before the main tasks start. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions. So what I'd like to do is thank everybody for taking the time to join this webinar today. There will be a recording available online through our YouTube channel, should you want to revisit it, and I think there will also be a link there to the slide deck that we've used.
That is correct.
If you do have any questions, please feel free, regarding gamification, please feel free to contact me. My email is on the slide deck. And thanks very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.